Hi, I'm Jennifer Hollick, and I would like to invite you to a new webinar as part of my Coffee with My Ancestors series called What's Wrong with Daddy? In this webinar, we are going to look at the effects of war on our returning veterans and our families, whether you're in the US or whether you're in Europe or somewhere else. Many of us have been afraid to ask this question. What was wrong with Daddy? What was wrong with Grandpa? What was wrong with Uncle Joe? What was wrong with great-grandpa? And while asking what was wrong is somewhat of a judgment, it's a very common word that we use. So what happened to them in their military service? Now, a lot of people will listen to family stories and they'll take that as truth. But as you'll often find, family stories may only contain a grain of truth, and the rest might be vastly out of context. It might be somebody else's story that the veteran brought home for a number of reasons, or it could be something that the family created to not be the outcast or the weird one or whoever in their neighborhood or their small circle. After the war, and we're going to be focusing on World War II in this program, but everything that I talk about applies to World War I, or you can even go back to the Civil War or before that, or even all the way up to Vietnam and the current wars that we've had since the 90s. We can look at what actually happened with our veterans while they were on active duty. Now, we'll be able to find a paper trail for some of this. When we look at my grandfather's story, there is a paper trail that gives me a little bit of information, but not having all of his medical records, not having an accurate story from the family, and not knowing about most of this until after my grandmother died, there's a lot of pieces that are still missing. But looking at the different pieces of the military story, whether we're looking at the personal aspect or we're looking at the higher level and going into unit records, whatever those look like for whatever branch you're working with, we can begin to identify situations that can possibly prove or disprove the family stories we've heard. One of the stories I heard about my grandfather was that he was on a ship and it was kamikazed. Well, I have his deck logs and that never happened. The worst thing that happened to a ship he was on was they ran up against some coral down by Puerto Rico and it created some damage in the hull and they had to go into port and have it fixed. So the ships he was specifically on did not have these massive encounters. That's not to say that in the convoys that they were part of, he didn't look out from where he was manning his guns to see something else happen on another ship. It's those kinds of things that we're looking at. We can also look at, if we're talking about an Army soldier, what was happening in this battle? What was happening in their specific company or that infantry regiment? Sometimes we can find out how many of the guys in the company died on that day or over the course of the battle. All of those things affected the veteran. And that can help us put the narrative together. The other thing that we're going to look at is what was the propaganda and programming here and in Europe for returning veterans. There are a lot of books that were written about this right after the war and as the war was ending. There are newspaper articles available where you can look at what were families being told. How were they being told to treat returning veterans? What were they being told to avoid talking about or avoid doing? All of these things also shape how our veterans and the families process these things, and then what trickled down through the generations. I think when you hear my story about my grandparents during World War II and the result of the aspects of their life I have been living for the last 6 years, you might be a little bit surprised. Now, these journeys are not always short and easy. This one I've been on for several years because it took me a while to be brave enough to start asking my family the harder questions, the things they didn't want to talk about. Because no matter what your veteran encountered during any war, the family unit often contains the energies of anger, grief, sadness, shame, hatred, all kinds of low vibrational negative energies. And sometimes it's just not even spoken about, but you can feel it. And then it's passed down. And these are just patterns that we can undo. We can clear and heal. So if you're interested in taking a much different look at your veteran's life after the war and what he or she experienced during the war, What's Wrong with Daddy is an introductory class to look at that. In about a month, there will also be another class, a more advanced class, where we're going to take this story and I'm going to teach different tools, a little bit more advanced tools to help you start to piece together what happened through the genealogy and military records, what happened through the family stories, so that you'll have an even clearer picture of why someone was the way they were, why the family behaved the way they did, why you may be carrying some of their trauma. So if you're interested, sign up today for What's Wrong with Daddy. And I look forward to walking this journey with you.